All right, welcome to the Bryce Eddy Show. So today my guest is Scott Walter. He and I are going to talk about Arabella Advisors and other billionaire-backed groups that have, really gotten into our campaigns and influenced the way we go here in the United States. And I think it's evil. Well, I'm going to get Scott's take on this and all the details behind this dark money. Scott, how are you, sir?
Great to be with you.
Yeah, so as I told you as we were starting to talk before we hit record, this is something that irritates me just beyond reason, because the fact that our election system obviously is, we're a republic. It's supposed to be for us. It's supposed to be free of the undue influence of others. We're supposed to be able to make our decisions, control our own destiny. But without most people knowing, there's just been so much interference on a global scale in American politics, and the manipulation, it seems, has no end. So you've uncovered a lot of the details of this, and I'd love for you first to begin with just laying out your kind of bio background. Tell us a little bit about Capital Research Center, and then let's get into the meat of this book that you've just written and some of the other things that we've got going on.
Sure. I am president of the Capital Research Center in Washington, D.C. We like to call ourselves America's investigative think tank because the whole point is deeply investigating the left and exposing it widely. I'm both proud of our regular website, capitalresearch.org, where you can sign up for an every other week newsletter that just has it's not a money grubbing thing. It's our greatest hits of our research. We have an awesome team. They're the ones who found, if you've heard of Arabella, it's only because of that team. We were the first ever to uncover them, ever to write about them, left, right, or center. But we also have another wonderful website, influencewatch.org, influencewatch.org. That is our online Wikipedia of the left. And I warn you, you're going to lose 5 hours the first time you go because you're going to go down so many rabbit holes. But just like Wikipedia, everything is documented. Everything, the links connect you back and forth between all the different things that are there. And that includes mega donors, foundations, unions, activists, movements like Green New Deal and the rest. And my background for this, I've worked at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, at Philanthropy Roundtable. Under George W. Bush, I was at the Domestic Policy Council and a special advisor to the president on domestic policy. And so I've been digging into and observing the nonprofit world for a long time.
All right. Well, I love that. So first, let's begin with defining some terms. I have thoughts when we talk about they've done this and they've done that, you're terming them the left. So define what that means, because I think it's a little bit more complex than what people understand in terms of the ideologies that animate a lot of this stuff. But from your perspective, who are they and who is the left?
Sure. Well, one way of thinking about this is to understand a lot of people jump straight to politics, but it's a lot more than just politics. So the way I put it is the nonprofit tail wags the Democratic Party dog. It is enormously more important who is head of Arabella Advisors or the Ford Foundation or Open Society Foundation than whoever happens to be chairing the DNC this afternoon. The party apparatus for the left is a tool, but it is not the driver of these things. The driver are the big money people and their own top thinkers and leaders. And by the way, one of the things I say about that is, in that case, people often just jump to George Soros. Now, I promise, I agree, George Soros is as bad as you think. But what a lot of people don't think or know is that the left has a lot of Soroses. There's also Reid Hoffman and Bill Gates and a guy you've never heard of, I bet, Hansjörg Wyss, Swiss billionaire, foreign national, shouldn't be touching our politics, but a huge donor to Arabella and the rest of the left. Pierre Omidyar. And there's a whole bunch of bad billionaires that all have the same last name, Foundation. The Ford Foundation is as bad as George Soros, arguably. Certainly, I can tell you that there are very few things I find Soros funding in the nonprofit world I don't also find the Ford Foundation funding. And by the way, one quickie thing on just how incredibly powerful and wicked Ford is. They invented women's studies. I mean, invented it. Thought, that might be cool. Let's make that happen. And they did. So
Interesting. Yeah, that I did not know. You and I agree, and yeah, George Soros is one of the villains, but it's like we have a whole Marvel comic book cast of villains that all have really what I believe one thing in common, and that is they want to centralize authority, power, and control. It's about power for them. Some of it is they have talked themselves into it being magnanimous. We just think that, we're so smart and we can, bring peace on earth through our efforts. And if you just give us control, if we just assert enough control over things, we'll smooth the waters for everybody. That's how smart and capable we are. And I think that you've got people like that. And then I do think that there are people who are truly evil disruptors, who in their hearts are black, cold, and evil. And I'm sure you can enlighten us as to a few of those people. But I think it doesn't kind of matter. What they're doing is truly great evil by stealing our liberty. They might be thinking that, we shouldn't deserve it, or the little people are going to do poorly with what we've been given. So they're going to take that control. But I look at that and I think that, okay, yes, it is leftism, but it's certainly not that they want, at least most of these folks that we're talking about, they really don't want communism. Communism is the sales pitch to the dumb college students and the people who think that life's unfair, who will willingly give them power. And that's really what I think is happening. How close am I?
Oh no, that is superb and profound. I'll tell you, when I was writing the book about Arabella Advisors, which is a network, runs a network of all these bad things, doing all these bad things for almost all of those bad billionaires I mentioned, including the foundations. And the editor at the end said, well, I insist you've got to speculate, like, what's driving them, right? Now, I admit I can't read their minds, but I have studied them for a long time. And what you just said is, to me, the central thing: control, control, control. If you want to use old-fashioned language, St. Augustine would have called it libido dominandi, the lust for power, right? Because control comes about only after you get the power. You got to seize the power, then you have the control. And here's the thing: the way I put it is, Arabella and the rest of the left's networks, they do so many different endless things, right? They invent new things regularly, like at one point, women's studies, for instance. Now, the thing that you can find in all of those efforts, however, is it is never about having more control and freedom for ordinary Americans, but it's always centralizing power more and more, right? And so why one wonders, would that be? Well, it isn't that easy to influence all Americans, right? There are plenty of Americans that George Soros or Hansjörg Wyss are never going to persuade, never going to, be able to manipulate. But when you centralize power in DC, it's a lot easier to manipulate things there. And we see that because the current administration is trying to, shave off some of that power, authority, and funding to certain things. And, it's causes a hysterical reaction, right? How dare you defund PBS? Like
Yeah.
that's a pillar of American life, and we'll all die without it. Or USAID's grantees. But this is the thing, right? Anything that in any way even slightly diminishes the power in DC, these people don't like.
Yeah, that's right, and the reactions are, hysterical. I mean, they really do go into, the Earth will never be the same kind of histrionics. If they cared so much, these people could fund PBS no problem. It's just not that popular, and we don't need it, and we don't need those things anymore. And many of those things should be charitably driven if there's something that's that important. And yeah, it's unbelievable the lengths people will go to, but it's the children or the useful idiots that they're using to foment that narrative, when yeah, it really is about the loss of control in Washington, D.C.
No, that's exactly it. And of course, the irony is so much of this is operated through the charitable sector. Those foundations theoretically are charitable institutions. They're grantees. Almost all of them are, legally speaking, charities. But of course, the real American understanding of charity is, hey, you and the people across the street and maybe across town, you're going to come together voluntarily and help each other and help your neighbors. That's a beautiful thing. And that keeps power and control and liberty right there where you live. But these gigantic charitable institutions, they don't want that at all. And in fact, they make it harder and harder for it to happen.
Yeah, I want to get your take on a fight that's going on right now, and maybe you have an opinion on it. But I've been concerned about the reaction on the right in doing some of the same kinds of things, and I don't want to change one master or central authority for another. And there are people, on the right that are calling for and pushing for their own centralization of authority. And I think it's equally as dangerous, because all of it just puts a master in place when we should be the masters of our own families and our own domains. Maybe you've been paying attention to the fight about the woke right, but I think that is a real interesting battle that's going on. Do you have a take on that?
Well, I can't say I've given it enormous thought on all the different controversies, but I completely agree with you that, let's put it this way, at a minimum, the burden of proof for anybody, left, right, or center, that is trying to use government to change people's lives, the burden, your project is guilty until proven innocent. And I'll give you one example that I have paid more attention to, and Capital Research has written a lot about. Some of the folks you're talking about, I believe, are keen to try to boost labor unions. Now, I completely agree that conservatives should be reaching out to union members. First of all, because they're oppressed by union leaders,
That's right.
especially, and they're ripped off by them, and mistreated, and have no freedom, because you can't get out of the union, or you have to stay in the union to keep your job in so many places. So we should reach out to union members, but the conservatives who think, oh, we're gonna secure our attachment to the working class by allying ourselves with union leadership, that's insane. That is so false. The big unions are some of the worst pillars of both the left and of oppressive government, both. And those leaders are never going to come to your side. The union members already are on conservative side overwhelmingly, but not the leaders. And it's the leaders who control the institutions. And man, they're talking about things like sectoral bargaining and jacking up the minimum wage, to extreme amounts, which would mean that young people never get their first job. That's a great thing if you're trying to help the left, right? You don't want Americans to start out working hard when they're young and have this crazy idea that I should be self-reliant and productive and capable of being responsible for myself. Well, the left doesn't want that, and that's why it's always been for these crazy things that destroy entry-level jobs. And that's
No,
what
they
by the
want.
way, unions being one of the great enforcers of that. But
Yeah,
man,
no,
for
they
anybody
they want.
conservative to be pushing that, crazy.
Yeah, I agree, but yeah, I mean the left always wants the state and the government to reign supreme in our lives, and be the answer for everything. And again, it's that centralization of control. But where my position is, and maybe you share it, is we need the individual and families to be strong, and we need small businesses to be strong, and that's how you end up having the most vibrant of all economies, is if everybody gets to contribute and everybody can kind of carve out their own piece in life. And we're moving further and further away from that. I sit firmly in the Gen X space, and I'm watching this battle go on between the boomer generation and then the millennial generation and younger right now, because in some ways the boomers did us wrong and set up some of these generations a little bit for failure. Now, two things can be true at once, and you can have a very entitled generation who does not know the value of hard work, who has been told once they graduate with a degree, they're destined to be the CEO. And you can also have some bad policies that were set up that enshrine so much power in institutions and stole it from the family. Well, if you wade into that water at all, I mean, it's amazing the amount of pushback you get from the boomer generation and the younger generations right now. And I think we've got an issue. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, generations going against each other is as old as in society is as old as mankind. And in fact, there's some great Shakespeare plays like Lear about these problems.
That's right.
So you're totally right. These are huge problems. I by the way, I should confess that I was born in '63, so I'm the very end of the boomer generation. The But it is the only way to untangle this horrible knot is to have just less central government, period, right?
Amen.
A lot of the problems come, as you say, when people think, oh, well, if we just manipulated the central government a little bit here and there and the other way, that would fix things. No, I'm sorry, it won't. The only fix is to decentralize power and authority in American life. There's no substitute for that. And by the way, for some of our lefty friends who are at least somewhat open to hearing this, I learned when I was young from the libertarian economist Milton Friedman that one of the most important reasons to be opposed to big government is because big business is going to capture it. And Friedman was totally right about that. So if you think you're a leftist who hates big corporations, okay, well then you better hate big government too, because the sort of thing you're talking about, family, neighborhood, and small business, well, big businesses, if they get to collude with government, are going to put the hammer to families, neighborhoods, and small businesses, right? Big businesses don't love all the regulations that our central government creates, but they can live with them. And in fact, they can live with them a whole lot better than a mom and pop business can. So
they are the movement oftentimes behind many of these regulations, and because it does wipe out a certain amount of their smaller competitors. It does wipe out some of the innovators that could disrupt their business, because then the cost of entry is too much, and we've seen it a lot. I mean, we saw that massive shift away from small businesses during COVID. I mean, it wiped out whole segments of our economy that were small business bastions, and many people had to sell, had to completely change their lives or go to work for some of these big corporations just to survive. And that shift is not good for our country, and it's certainly not good for the individual.
No, and same with doctors, right? By socializing medicine ever more, so many doctors I or my family members would go to, right? They've now had to give up their independent private
Right.
practices and join huge medical companies. Well, hey, lefties, it was your socialist medicine that did that.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was ACA was one of the biggest boondoggles ever, in that it ended up driving up the cost exponentially, and it consolidated the marketplace, and it took what was already not so free of a market, and put massive government program on top of it, massive government regulation on top of an already heavily regulated industry. And all of the doctors ended up selling their practice associations, and the hospitals consolidated, and then costs went through the roof. And we see that over and over again in all kinds of industries. As soon as they capture it to the 3 or 4 big companies, then you're cooked, and you have no alternatives and no place to go. And that seems like that was the goal of the Biden administration when they talked about even AI. I think that's what turned, and maybe you heard the story from Mark Andreessen, but that was the moment that he decided, okay, we got to support this Trump guy, is because they told us we're going to bless 3 or 4 companies and nobody else, so don't bother investing in these startups.
Well, it is the whole turn of Silicon Valley is fascinating, and I think that is a huge part of it. And you saw this, with Musk as well. But the I guess what I would say to ordinary people is, do you love your electric company and your water company? Are those like your favorite corporations you ever deal with? Because that is what the lefties in government want. They want they don't want regular corporations, which can, by the way, which sometimes die. Right, big giant things have disasters happen to them, as long as they're at the mercy of the consumers out there. But utilities, they don't. They live forever, and they're not fabulously successful. They don't get they're not like a Tesla or something, but they are guaranteed that government supplied income thanks to the government guaranteed monopoly on electricity or water. And that's what the left wants for everything. As you say, they want to be able to we'll let there be 2 or 3 AI companies, and we, the government, will control them, and that'll be it. Period.
Yeah, exactly. So, let's get into your book a little bit. I could talk to you about all kinds of little thoughts that we have here. What would surprise our readers? What would surprise people? What would they find in the book? You mentioned that billionaire that's under the radar, the Swede. Who else? Who do you think, in your opinion, is you've dove in or dive deeper into their background, do you think are the up and coming evil players? Is there anybody we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's worth the reason I thought it was worth a whole book on Arabella is because it's, first of all, it's the biggest such thing on the left or right. There's no equal in size anywhere. It's billions of dollars every election cycle flowing through their network. And it almost all of the lefty billionaires and foundations make use of it. So I think one of the things that the 2 most surprising billionaires probably would be one that everybody's heard of and one nobody's heard of. The one everybody's heard of is Warren Buffett. And I regret to say that he is a very big donor into the Arabella network on the abortion scheme. Most people don't know, but he's one of the biggest funders on the planet of both abortion and population control, which is, essentially abortion for foreigners. That I think would surprise a lot of people. And it's sad because obviously Warren Buffett has done a lot of good things in his life. Impressive businessman. And many of us, God knows, in our pensions and 401ks and stuff, have money invested with Berkshire Hathaway companies. The other billionaire that people have not heard of, but is also incredibly, in fact, more important to Arabella, is Hansjörg Wyss. And he's not a Swede, he's a Swiss.
Swiss.
Easy
Thank
mistake.
you. Yes.
I probably misspoke maybe, but
No, that was me.
He's a Swiss billionaire. He made his money in medical devices. There was a big scandal at one point with his medical device company, and several of his top executives went to jail because of it. Some people thought perhaps he should have, but that they got thrown under the bus. And he lives most of the time in Wyoming, but even though he made his money in the U.S. and basically lives in the U.S., he has never even gotten a green card, much less citizenship, which means that it's illegal for him, for instance, to write a check to, a Senate campaign or something, right? Senator, reelect Senator so-and-so. Now, interestingly, some years ago, he was so dumb that he was stroking checks to things like Friends of Dick Durbin, for instance, one of my favorite of his folks he supported. I testified in front of Mr. Durbin not long ago. So he wrote some checks like that are completely illegal. Unfortunately, none of that was discovered until after the statute of limitations expired, but you can still just go in the Federal Election Commission database and find those old checks. Now, he got smarter and he discovered Arabella. And with Arabella, you see, he writes checks to their nonprofits, and that's totally fine. And by the way, you know what? There's no limit to the checks he can write there. When if you write hard dollar political checks to campaigns and parties, there's all kinds of limits. Not with nonprofits. The sky's the limit. And by the way, it's also illegal for it's illegal for any foreign money to go into the parties or political campaigns. It is not illegal for foreign money to go into the nonprofits. So no limits either way. And by the way, and this is the left claims to care about campaign finance reform, but somehow they've never cared about this. But so let me tell you more about Hansjörg. So now he writes checks to the Arabella nonprofits. And while he can't legally write a check to a super PAC, he can write a check to an Arabella political nonprofit, 501c4, technically speaking. That's like the NRA or League of Conservation Voters, right? Well, Arabella runs its own C4 political nonprofits. Wyss has written them tens of millions a year in checks. And those places then can pass money on to super PACs and wage into political campaigns. The other thing, again, scandalously legal, under the law, ballot initiatives are not considered political elections, right? Because you have to have a candidate for it to be considered a political election. Ballot initiative, you don't even have to be a 501c4 like the League of Conservation Voters. You can even be a C3, right? A charity, and weigh in on ballot initiatives. Well, surprise, surprise, the Arabella Network is one of the biggest players in the country in left-wing ballot initiatives. And I'm sure you're aware, in recent years, the left has been using ballot initiative elections in the states to drive turnout in those states. So in other words, yes, they'll put something like, abortion or minimum wage or some policy issue they care about as a ballot initiative, and they do want to win the policy change. But what they want even more is to use that ballot initiative as a way to drive their voters to the polls. And then they don't just win the ballot initiative, they get to win lots of other elected offices. So Wyss has given over $260 million to Arabella. And as far as we can tell, he was its first sugar daddy in its earliest years. The first year, 2007 was the first year that the nonprofits took in more than $1 million a year, Right now they take in almost 2 billion a year, but back then it was the first over $1 million a year. Well, they had a budget of 1.7 million, and he basically supplied 1 million of the 1.7 all the way back there. So he's not just one of their biggest donors ever. He also was apparently the sugar daddy that got the whole thing going. He's given another $250 million outside the Arabella network to other left-wing nonprofits. So again, you've never heard of him, but he cares about you. And he's been doing all kinds of things for decades to affect your life.
Yeah, and that's why I always talk to the people who say, "Oh, I really don't care about politics. I'm not really interested in it." Let's keep in mind, politics is interested in you, and we have a responsibility to pay attention because that's how things like this happen. So what's the answer? How do we? You've identified the problem. How do we solve it? And what do we need to push on? In terms of, is it legislation? What can we do to, get this dark money out of this?
Sure. That is a tricky question, of course, because to some extent, you're never going to be able to say people can't spend their money to make their voices heard in politics, even when they
Right.
have horrible ideas, right? So there's not a final solution to all of it, but there definitely are reforms that could make a difference legally. So, Congress could easily say ballot initiatives are elections and the same restrictions apply there. That would be one thing. Also, you've had states like Ohio that have passed laws saying no foreign money for our ballot initiatives.
Yeah, which makes
By the way,
sense. That should be logical.
well, and in case you weren't sure it made sense, I can prove it makes sense. Mark Elias sued desperately against that. So Mark
Yeah.
Elias wants foreign money in your elections. Again, even while pretending, our democracy is threatened if we don't have more campaign finance reform, by which what they really, their reforms are not real reforms. So that's another thing. You could have more transparency with one of the ways Arabella works is it only has about a half dozen nonprofits, right? Independent filing IRS, disclosures each year, nonprofits, half a dozen of those, but those half dozen run hundreds and hundreds of fiscally sponsored projects, right? That's what you and your viewers see. Things like Keep Iowans Healthy, Secure Michigan Elections, Floridians for a Fair Shake. You know how good the left is with the labels are always beautiful, right? Well, here's the thing. Those fake little groups that are fiscally sponsored by Arabella's nonprofits, they essentially are a Wizard of Oz operation. You're a state congressman or maybe even a senator in DC, right? And all of a sudden you're being savagely attacked by Demand Justice or Keep Iowans Healthy or whatever. You probably are scared because you see all these Facebook ads and maybe mobile billboards going around, attacking you or boosting your opponent, blah, blah. It's a Wizard of Oz thing because you're like Dorothy at the beginning of the movie. She sees the wizard and she's scared and it really affects her behavior because it's so big and scary, right? But then at the end of the movie, you pull the curtain back and the wizard is just an old guy at a microphone, or in Arabella's case, it's some doofus in a DC office created that website and bought the Facebook ads. So when you pull the curtain back, it's not so scary anymore, is it? So what you're doing right now, educating people about this, is really critical because when the curtain's pulled back, the scam doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, so where do we get the book? How do we follow you? How do we help in your efforts to expose all this?
The book, Arabella, Arabella, that's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you get books. The paperback revised edition with extra information just came out a week ago. And then capitalresearch.org is our main site. As I say, you can sign up for the e-newsletter there every couple of weeks, get all our greatest hits of our research. And then you should also definitely bookmark influencewatch.org, the Wikipedia of the left. You'll discover all kinds of amazing money trails and interconnections among these bad guys.
Well, Scott, that was excellent. Thank you for coming on and sharing all of your research with us. I look forward to reading the updated copy of that book. And yeah, really, thank you for coming on.
Again, great to be with you.
All right. Well, to God be the glory, and we are out. Hey, thank you for watching or listening to this show. If you are someone who listens to us on the podcast apps, please go to our Rumble channel. Even if you're not going to watch us there, we'd appreciate you hitting subscribe. We want to boost those numbers up and make sure that that channel continues to grow. But again, thank you so much for listening to us.